Yes.
Do you believe there was foul play involved, and is there any history with this family?
The family are cooperating, and it's really too early to tell. No, they're not cooperating right now. They have attorneys.
Is there anything else on that front you wanted to say or speak about?
Not right now.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Today's day 260 since 5-year-old Summer Wells disappeared. She would since have turned 6 years old in the intervening period. We are sort of heading out of the winter gradually in the United States, in Tennessee, in this area in Hawkins County where she disappeared. And gradually sort of things are heading towards spring. And one wonders whether it's going to be summer, again, a summer without summer.
Well, I knew right away that she was abducted. You know, I knew that right away, and that's what I told them from the beginning. But they have to go through their, I forget the word.
Investigation.
They have to do one step at a time, I guess. But I'm sorry that they had to spend so many man hours in these woods and everything. I've seen them limping and everything else, and I feel for them. But I just wish there was a way that neighbors could search neighbors' houses, and then if they're not willing, get a search warrant or something. But there's just no way you can search every single house, in the eastern United States or whatever.
So what is quite interesting is, and I'm sure many of you are aware, there's been this development in the last day or two that there's been ongoing search for Summer, 2 days thus far, where they've been searching for Summer in this sort of winter brush. That search seems to be centered in the Beach Creek community area, so they are still searching quite close to the Wells home, what we refer to as Chalet Wells. And if you think about that clip right at the beginning that I've played, which is from the Sermon on the Mount, where Don Wells, who's currently serving time in detention in prison for driving under the influence, he's basically was saying, they need to not, she was abducted, so they need to not look here. They need to look in neighbors' properties and also, I guess, in other countries like Mexico. And, one's kind of got to think, and he also says he thought it was an abduction immediately. He knew immediately. But, he wasn't even there when she disappeared. And so one's got to wonder, should you really be looking around that area? And it's quite interesting that you have the scenario of the topography being really, really challenging, but don't we have the equipment, whether it is ground penetrating radar, whether it is cadaver dogs, doesn't one have the equipment to do a grid search and properly find out one way or the other, is someone there or not? The other thing that is a factor, and you can see this in the photos, is there is a channel of water that is moving quite close to the home, and that is a possible way that remains could move from A to B. Beyond them being placed there, they could then be taken from there by stormwater, right? And in my previous coverage, I did talk about another person who disappeared. This was an elderly man. I think he had dementia or something. He was actually found kind of in a water channel. And so I don't know whether they did exhaust their searches in terms of that area, but that's certainly something to bear in mind. In terms of the subject of this particular video, in terms of the subject matter right now, is this idea of the family not cooperating, right? And it's quite interesting if you think about them apparently cooperating. I say apparently, it's kind of quote unquote apparently cooperating right in the early days. Were they actually cooperating? But in any event, now they are definitely not cooperating, and that is according to Hawkins County Sheriff Ronnie Lawson. And what I do think is quite interesting is taking what he said and then taking also what Candus has said via, I think, a spokesperson. She said something like, I'm very happy that they are still looking for my daughter Summer. I heard about it, but I didn't see anybody. Thank you for remembering her. Now, if you take those words, you take the sentiment of that statement, she's saying, I'm very happy that they're still looking for my daughter, right? And then she says, I heard about it. I heard that they're looking for her, but I didn't see anyone. So it's almost like she's saying, I'm so glad you're looking for her, but I didn't really go to the trouble to find out who was or where they were. And, in that sense, it's like, I'm not actually going to help you out. I'm not going to go with you and search for you. I'm not going to be... And wouldn't any other parent in that situation do that? In other words, if you had lost a child or a dog or something and you heard someone was out there actually searching, wouldn't you go out and engage with that person, try to assist them? Wouldn't you care? Or would you just say, oh, I heard about it, but I didn't see anyone. I carried on watching TV, right? Also, where she says, thank you for remembering her, there's a kind of resignation about that. And I've been using that word all along with the Summer Wells case, that there's a sense of resignation about what has happened. And when we talk about resignation, we're talking about a kind of almost a reluctant acceptance of something that has happened, or of knowledge of something that has happened. It's a resigned attitude to something in particular. Is that based on guilty knowledge, or is that based just on the psychology of these people, that they are not particularly interested in what is going on around them, that they are very troubled by their circumstances, by poverty, and so they don't really have time to deal with things like this? What do you think it is? We didn't really get much from the sheriff. He said, like I've said from day one, everything is still on the table. We've not ruled out anything. And so I guess one could include with that you could include that she wasn't abducted. Oh, sorry, that she was abducted. So it seems like the impression one has from law enforcement is that they really don't have a lot. The other thing that I think is quite interesting is there's been an impression, I think, that Don has been intimidating Candus, that Don has been calling the shots, that Don has been in control, that Don has been controlling the narrative. And so one would imagine, if Don is kind of out of the way, if Don is not physically present with Candus, that Candus would then theoretically have the freedom to come forward and cooperate, and whatever you want to say. She would volunteer, she would make suggestions, she would come forward. She would be kind of quite open in a way that perhaps she wasn't while Don was lurking around, right? And one wonders whether this search had something to do with that, whether the searchers weren't so much searching for Summer, but sort of trying to see the response from Candus. Would Candus engage with them? Would Candus reveal something that hasn't been revealed before? And so I think if you felt sorry for Candus and you were sort of saying, you know what, she's under the spell of Don. Don is controlling everything. She's just a pawn in his thing. Then I don't think you can still say that, given that he's not in the way now. He's not calling the shots now. Do you see what I'm saying? I also find it quite interesting that the TBI have said that they thought there was a very real possibility that Summer wandered off. And I think that that is something that both Candus and Don were vehemently opposed to. Just even the chance of that, they were like, that is impossible. And if you think about that just practically, if she did wander off then, and something happened, you would expect her to be quite close to the area. You know, how far can a 5-year-old girl get on her own, barefoot, and basically, you know, she doesn't have a vehicle, she doesn't have a bicycle, she can't fly a helicopter. You know, if she'd wandered off and something had happened to her, she'd become injured or something, then you would expect to look for her in that area. And perhaps that's why they say, no, she would never have wandered off. children wander off all the time, especially young children, right? And so the other aspect that I think one's got to think about with that is the TBI is saying, well, maybe she did wander off, kind of lets the parents off the hook in that they did anything wrong. Maybe they would feel, well, for her to wander off, we were not paying attention to them or to her. And that then also touches on this whole thing of what happened at the swimming hole. You know, in terms of wandering off, you have the same thing of, I wasn't paying 100% attention and then something could have happened to her. And then what, right? The other thing just to highlight here is there was a long period where people criticized me for suggesting that that either Don or Candus or both of them were drinking or were under the influence at all during the Sermon on the Mount and so on and so on and so on. And the evidence has shown, the statements from witnesses has shown, what is the situation right now has shown that alcohol is definitely part of the fabric of this case, certainly in terms of the habitual use of it. And one wonders how far that rabbit hole actually goes in terms of the circumstances of this case. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.
Nobody deceives like an addict.